Hey, this is Daniel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this cool automatically animated scene. Now, this is not a complex project. It's actually super simple. There's only two objects involved, one material, and an empty. That's all it takes to make this scene. But as with all my tutorials, I usually aim at newer users, but I'm going to teach you some really great tricks along the way and explain things so that you can use these simple fundamental techniques and apply them to more complex situations and scenes that you'll be creating on your own. So if you want to learn something, let's get started. I'm going to add a plane by typing Shift A, Mesh, Plane, and I'm going to hit F2 to name it Floor Parent. Why? You'll see in a minute. We're going to tab into edit mode, press S, and type in 10 on my numpad and enter. So I just scaled it up by the factor of 10. Now I like to do that in edit mode so that the actual object scale right here is still ones, but for this project it might not actually matter in the end. Sometimes it really does matter, but that's a different topic. So we're going to subdivide this about 10 times. So with this still in edit mode, which we're already in this face, the single face of this plane is already selected. If it's not, you can select it by clicking on it. For me, it's right click, or you can press A for all to select all the faces. We're going to go to our search function, which is F3, type in subdivide, and there it is, faces or edge subdivide. Now this only divided it one time, which gave us 4 squares from 1, but we're going to turn this all the way up to 9. Now, why 9? Because I want 10 faces. It's just how the math works out. So if you count, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, middle line, and then 5 on the other side. And look, the faces perfectly line up with the grid that we already have, the Blender grid, which is like, I guess, 1 meter square, I think it is. And that's good because we're going to use cubes. And we're going to make cubes basically populate each vertex. The vertex are the dots that connect the edges and that create the faces, right? You need at least 3 vertexes to create a face. You need at least 2 vertexes to create an edge. Edges make the face. In this case, these are squares or quads. If we cut it like this, we got a tri or a triangle. But we don't want that to undo that, just to explain that to you. So let's create our base cube, which we're only going to make one of, but Blender is going to, like I said, populate or duplicate it all across this face. And then we're going to make it move with the texture. So Shift A, add a cube. Don't change any of the parameters. We're going to leave it exactly the size that it is, which is by default 2 meters on every edge. And that's great. So next we're going to parent this cube to here. So the floor is the parent, the cube is the child. Let me change my view. There we go. It's just a little easier to look at. By the way, if you go to object mode here and click on the down arrow, you can also turn on and off the cavity, which is like the little edge shine there. You can turn up and down ridges or valleys, which we don't have any of yet. You can even turn on shadow, which is cool most of the time, but sometimes it freaks out. And if you want to get real visual, just to give you some eye candy, you can set up a matte cap if you want to give it, a look. But this is not the look it will have when it renders. This is just for pre-visualization of your work. So let's go back to studio mode. And anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, I need to stop teaching stuff. Select our floor plane, select your cube, and then shift select your floor parent, and then press Control P. Now, this is different types of parenting relationships. Set parent to the object, and there we go. If anything changes scale, you can redo that and do keep transform, which won't apply any scaling or anything like that. So now if you look over here in our outliner, if you don't have this, by the way, you can change your editor type to outliner and put it on view layer mode, which kind of shows us the hierarchy of everything. So we've got our floor parent, which is just the boring flat face, and then the cube, which is its child underneath it. So let's click back on the floor parent, and there's some options here that we're going to turn on to make this cube all over the place and make a whole bunch of cubes without doing a whole bunch of work. And it is in the instancing panel. So I'm going to expand the instancing panel, press vertices, and there we go. The cube, which is the child, is now reproduced, for lack of better words, on every vertex of the plane. Okay. Now let's turn off show instancer because we don't want to see the plane when we render this, right? I guess we can see it in the viewport, but when we finally render, we don't want to see the flat plane that's in the middle. Where is it? If we go to X-ray, you can't really see it, but you get the point. We don't want to see it. Now, what we do want to do is we want to mess up this flat plane and give it some height and movement and basically displace it with a noise pattern. So go to our modifier, which is the wrench or spanner. If you're not American, click on Add Modifier, go to Displace, which is over here in the Deform modifiers, and we're going to click New. And now we have a texture. You could name it if you want. You don't have to, but just for visual sake, we know that this is actually referring to a texture that we just created. Now click on the Show Texture in Texture tab, because there is a texture tab down here which you could go to, or there's a little shortcut here. It just takes you right to it. And what is our texture? It's a boring black nothingness, because it's looking for an image or movie, which we could upload, but we don't want to do that. We want to use a procedural noise pattern. So click on the drop down, click on clouds, and now we got this cloudy texture. Let's play with the settings here. So let's do size. There we go. As we drag the size, we can immediately see the black and white values of the noise are driving the height of each cube. Why? Because if we turn off that cube, we just hide it by clicking on that monitor button. We can see our plane is no longer flat. It's getting distorted by the noise. Each vertex is being pushed up or down based on the white and black values of the noise. Now we can control the intensity of this distortion by going back to our displacement modifier and dragging up the strength number. By the way, when you're adjusting number values like this in Blender, if you hold shift and click drag, it's more subtle, like maybe 10 times slower. And then you just normal click and drag, it's of course faster. So if you really want to tweak stuff very minutely in small values, hold shift when you're dragging a number value. Okay, so this is the intensity, or in our case, the height, because it's only distorting upwards, which is what we want. All right, let's turn back on our cube by clicking on that monitor button again so we can see it back in the viewport. Super cool. You can already do some really cool macro renders, like get up real close, set up some depth of field, put some little astronauts there in a crashed ship, like they landed on some weird dimension. If you're creative enough, you can make some really cool scenes out of this. So let's animate the noise. So it's not just a static this, we want it to move, and we want it to move real slow and smooth. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. So to do this, we actually need to do this cool trick where the coordinates of the floor texture is based on what? Local, global, or object. We're going to use object because now we can set an object. And if we just move this object, say over here, that's outside of the camera view, it's going to move the texture. And this is a procedural noise texture, which means there's no start or end or borders. It's not an image or a video. It goes on forever and ever mathematically, and that's great. So Shift A, let's add another object, and let's do an empty. And it doesn't matter which one you do, but I'm just going to do the cube, and I'm going to press G to move it over here out of the way. Cool. Now let's click back onto our plane here, select object, and do empty. Another way to do that is hit the eyedropper, put it over an object. You can see it there, and then click on that. Awesome. Okay, so watch what happens when I move this cube. Oh my goodness, look at that. I'm barely moving this cube, and our little scene is already jumping around, and that's great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the rotation of this so it doesn't have to move. It's just going to spin in place like this. Let's change our origin or our pivot to individual, and RZ to rotate it on the Z axis, just like that, but very slow. Okay, so how do we animate this without having to do keyframes? Because keyframes are the traditional way to move things or rotate things, but you got to do them manually, and they end. They have an endpoint, which, maybe we don't want that. Maybe you want to make a 10-hour render of this for a song video on YouTube. I don't know. But regardless, I like to auto-animate stuff. That's what I call it. I think it's called using drivers, actually, so that we never have to do a keyframe. So select your cube. Go to the Object tab here if you're not already in here. Look in the Transform panel. Go to your Rotation of Z, and click on it, and let's type in $, or pound, or hashtag if you're, Gen Z, and type in the word frame, asterisk, which is multiply, .00015. That's a very small decimal, but what it's doing is it's grabbing the frame number, let's say on frame 1, multiplying it by .00015, and then that new number is the rotation number. And then frame 2, we multiply that by that tiny decimal, and that's the new rotation number. So if I press play, the cube is actually rotating. I can barely see it, but if I zoom in over here, I definitely see these moving. We can speed this up by changing our decimal to a larger decimal. Let's change the 15 to a 2. A little bit faster. Let's try a 3. This is like a 10,000th, right? Isn't it a 10,000th? I think it is. Cool. That's a nice speed. I can see it, but it's not like crazy and distracting and hyperactive. And over here, if I zoom into my cube, it's turning ever so slowly. All right, cool. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's how you make the scene. Now the rest of it, and where the artistic element comes in, is your lighting and your texturing. So if I go to rendered view, let's see what this looks like. I'm going to actually stop the animation. Boring, clay blocks, super sharp edges, no cool lighting, no colors or textures or reflection or anything. And that's, maybe I should do a part 2 in this, but I'll show you a few tricks here. So I'm actually going to go to my cube by selecting it over here. I'm going to press / on my number pad, which basically solos your object out. It hides everything else temporarily until you press it again, it'll go back. But if you press / with an object selected, it solos it. Tab into edit mode. All the faces should be by default selected. I'm going to press Control B for bevel. And I'm going to make this a really nice rounded edge. And I'm doing this, by the way, by rolling my mouse wheel. I think you can also use the plus button on your numpad when you're doing the bevel operation. So I've got about 5 segments worth of bevel, which is basically the subdivision, and then tab out of edit mode. We got these ugly sharp edges here, which will not look very smooth in the render. So I'm going to press W and choose shade smooth. There we go. It smooths out those rough edges. Now, if we / out of the solo mode, look at this. They all have this beautiful soft edge. I love it. All right, so that's the first trick for some nice eye candy is smooth out those sharp edges. Next, let's apply a texture. So click on your floor parent plane, go to your materials tab, make a new material. And without doing any crazy nodes or anything, let's just play with some settings here. Let's go to material mode so we can see roughly what the material is gonna look like before any ray tracing or lighting is applied. So let's give it a color. I'm gonna do like a nice blue color, because blue is always pretty. And I'm not seeing any material change out because I made a mistake. The material that we just created needs to be on the cube, not the plane. So let's just click on cube. Click on this drop down and select our material. There we go. Cool. All right, let's scroll down. What do we got here? We got metallic. We turn this up. It's got this nice shininess to it. Glossy metallic surface. We can turn up and down specular, which really just shows where the light is bouncing off of. I normally don't play with specular. Just keep that where it is. Now, roughness is fun. This will make it like truly reflective and smooth like glass, or very, very rough like, I guess, paper, where it absorbs light and doesn't really bounce back a whole lot. So if you want to get a really cool render, if you want it to be shiny metallic, do that. A low roughness, 0.13 is what I've got it at. That's our first step. Now, if you want to add some nodes to add some interesting effect, I'll show you how to do that real quick. Let's put our mouse on the top corner and let's split this view so that the bottom is the 3D viewport and the top, we're going to change it to the shader editor. Okay, zoom in here. Let's make a really neat node that can give us a random colors for each cube. Shift A, click on search and type in OBJ. Object info is what we want. And one of these outputs here is a random number. So we're going to make this random number shift the color wheel for this color. But if we just do this, it only gives us different shades of gray. Now they really reflect it. Let me fix this. There we go. So that's not really interesting unless you want the monochrome look, but let's play with colors. Shift A, search, type in hue. This gives us hue saturation value. And look at this. We can set a color. Let's just do blue. Plug in the random value into the hue setting and then the color output to the base color. And now the random number for each object instance, which is between 0 and 1, is going into the hue slider, which is also 0 to 1 slider, and it's changing the hue. Pretty sweet. If you want to limit that value to a certain color range, you can make a color ramp. Type in ramp, put it here. And now instead of 0 to 1, we can make this from a higher number, say 0.5 to 1. So now we have the warmer colors and a little bit and some purple in there. We can slide this up as well to kind of narrow it down to make less variety. Flop it upside down to get the other part of the color wheel. We can make this maybe a lower number like 0.6 and 0.5. So obviously between 0.5 and 0.6 are all the purple and blues, okay? Let's slide it all down. Let's try 0.1 to 0.2. Let's see what those are. The greens and yellows. Cool. So hopefully this isn't over your head. I'm literally just doing a minimum and a maximum number that applies to the color wheel. And it's spitting that out as the color for the material. So that's fun. You could also apply this value to things like roughness or a different metallic value. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Let's give some imperfection to the surface. I'm going to make it shiny like this, but let's stick a noise material in here. So let's type in add and type in the word texture. Here's all the noise textures we have. Let's use this, the one that's actually called noise texture. Put it right there. Shift A. Let's do a ramp again, because this really gives you that nice control over the minimum and maximum values, as well as the contrast. You can invert it, all kinds of fun stuff. So plug in factor into there. Plug this into roughness. And it's thinking. There we go. We got this ugly, speckly texture. Let's rotate our view to where we can see the light kind of glancing off one of the faces. Here we go. By the way, I'm using my middle mouse button. As I click, it allows me to rotate. And then if I want to move around, I hold Alt and Shift and left click. That's panning, right? You can also do all this over here with the hand for panning, zoom and drag for zooming, camera to go in or out of the camera view, and then this goes from asymmetric to perspective. And if you click on the gimbal, it would allow you to freely rotate. Okay, anyway, let's get the light glancing off of one of these faces. I can see it shining. And now look what happens when we play with the ramp here. Like I said earlier, contrast, but we don't want that. We want a very subtle effect. So I am going to add some texture by increasing the detail and the roughness. There we go. That looks much more realistic, like a dirty piece of metal. And let's play with these handles. The most reflective part is the black handle. So if you slide the black handle all the way up, pretty much everything is black in the final texture output, and it's going to be all zero roughness, which is shiny. But if we move it down a little bit and maybe change it from pure black to a little bit grayer, like 0.1. There we go. Now the shiniest part is always going to be 0.1. See? Now before it was like a mirror. Now it's a little bit hazy, and I like that. So let's put that around there. We can play with our white point as well, which is the most rough area, which is completely like this, like wood or paper, where it doesn't shine. We can drop that a little bit too, to maybe 0.4. Spread it out. There we go. Cool. Also, the size of the noise is a little bit tiny, so let's put the scale down, sort of backwards, right? Smaller number means bigger noise pattern. There we go. So it's not like in your face, but if you look, you're like, hey, you know what? There's some detail there, and every cube is not completely perfect. Let's press numpad 0 and see what our render view is. Not very interesting. Let's click on our camera by selecting it, or you can select it over here and go to your camera tab on the right and drag up your focal length to something much tighter. Like 100, 200 is really tight. So it's going to have that really cool flat, almost isometric view. And let's turn up our sample count a little bit so the render will be smooth. I'm going to go to 200 and turn on denoise. This might look a little different than yours. That's okay. I'm using K cycles X, so it's a little different, but it's really the same thing as normal Blender. So hit F12 to render it. And there we go. I'm using an RTX 2080, by the way, and that took me 15 seconds. And it's not really great just because the light angle is not cool. Like the top of the squares look boring. I like the sides. They look really pretty on the sides, but the top is not interesting. So I might want to rotate that light more behind, add another light with different color. There's a lot of things you can do to make this look a little fancier. And the noise still looks really like it's too much. It's too detailed. So let's fix that real quick. Let's put the scale at maybe 0.2 and turn the roughness down a little bit. There we go. All right, and there it is. So this is before and after of that scale change. So this is before, this is after. So I like it, but I just noticed something. I don't know if you can see this on YouTube or your phone, because this is really dark, but the pattern of noise is the same on top of each cube. It's literally like, it's the same because the cube is the same. There's only one real cube with noise on it, but it's being duplicated. So I'll show you a cool trick on how to fix that. Go back to our nodes up here. Let's just stretch that down. And the noise texture itself is what we're seeing, the pattern repeating. So select it and press Control T, which is a Node Wrangler add-on keyboard shortcut that gives us the texture coordinates and the mapping automatically. And we want to get this actual random number up here and just plug it into location. There we go. Sweet. So now every instance of the cube has a different noise texture. Let's double check that by Control Shift clicking the color ramp, which is another Node Wrangler trick that show us a preview the output of just one node. See, it's actually bypassing this shader, which is what gives us the realistic look. It's just showing us the color ramp, and it's almost doing what I need, but it's still very similar. You can see they're all pretty close to each other. They're just slightly shifted because what is this number coming out of here? It's something between 0 and 1. That's not a large value to move the location of a texture. So we can actually multiply this. Just do a vector math there, drop it in the middle of that noodle. So again, our random number is going through a math node, and let's just multiply it to make it a larger number. Multiply by, I don't know, 10. There we go. Now we got a lot of variety here. Some are shifted, some are not. And as we play with this noise, you can see it's what's better. There we go. So we multiplied that 0 to 1 value, which is random, by 10 or whatever you want to do. You can do 50. And then that gives a new location for each noise on each cube instance. Sweet. Now let's go back to previewing it the normal way. So Control Shift click this guy. And now this is the normal. That's how it should look, right? Sweet. Now, if we want to change the angle of the light to make it more interesting, I like backlighting because I'm a photographer, so I love backlight. I hit numpad 7, do a flat above view, and I can see everything from above, but I don't quite know where my camera is. So I'm going to click on my camera, Zoom out. Oh, there it is. I had to zoom out a little bit more. It's right there. So we want our light to be shooting from behind. So I'm going to select my light, G to move it, R to rotate it. Make sure you're on individual origins pivoting so that it actually rotates around itself, not anything else. And there we go. Now it's backlit. Let's maybe flatten it. I'm changing my angle here. Let's flatten a little bit to there. If your light object, by the way, is a sun light, it doesn't actually matter where it is in the scene. I could put it over here and it'll still light it from that direction. It works like a laser beam, right? Perfectly straight light. There is no curvature or origin point of the light coming outwards. It just all shoots at one direction. There we go. Now let's render that. Awesome. That is way more interesting than before. Let's check it out. Boring and weird and noisy to interesting. Maybe over the top with the brightness on top. We can move the light to fix that, but it's already way more interesting. And I love having a photographer in mind because I think in terms of light angles and reflection and composition, it really helps with doing CG art. That looks pretty sweet. One last trick, and I'll finish this video. This is like twice as long as I thought it would be, but that's okay. Hopefully you're getting some good nuggets out of here. I'm going to add some depth of field, which is that blurriness of the background of the foreground that real photos always have, especially when you get close to an object or if you have a long lens, you get what's called bokeh, and I love it. So let's select our camera. You can right click on the border of the camera here if you're in camera mode. If you're right here, you can actually just click it or select it in your outliner. That's 3 ways to select your camera. Go ahead into the camera tab, turn on depth of field, and then go to viewport display, turn on limits. Now we have this laser beam shooting into infinity, and this is our focus range. So let's click on this little crosshair and drag it to the cubes. You can also manually change the distance here, which will move how far away the focus point is. And I'm going to zoom in here, make sure it's intersecting some of the cubes. It doesn't have to. It can be over here. Just these will be sharp and clear, and these will all be blurry. But I want it to be a little bit half and half. So I'm going to go right around there, which is the middle of the shot, right? Wherever this is shooting is the middle of the frame. If you press 0, you can see it's the middle. So half will be blurry, half will be sharp. All right, now we need to give it an f-stop. So I'm going to go to camera view with numpad 0, go to rendered view, and let's turn down this f-stop number to 1. Okay, I don't see anything yet. Let's do a decimal, 0.5. Okay, I think I see some blurring back there. Let's do 0.1. There we go. Very dramatic, very macro photography looking. The foreground and the background over here are completely out of focus. And in the middle, which is all along where this crosshair is sharp. See, even this is sharp over here because it is within the focus distance of 52 meters from the camera. Now, if we focus closer, look at that. Now this block on the bottom is in focus and the others aren't. We can focus far, and man, I love that. That is so cool. Again, as a photographer, I have a special appreciation for this kind of stuff because it just looks so good. And this is how photography works, which is really cool. So that's cool. Maybe a bit intense. Let's do 0.2. An impossible aperture, by the way. This would be like a ginormous hole of light in your lens. That's pretty good. And let's move our light angle a little bit. I'm going to click on my light and press RR, which allows you to freely rotate the light. Now be careful, you might lose it. That looks cool, kind of almost looks transparent. But it's just because the things are so shiny. Get an interesting angle. See, I had too much of that bounce back lighting. So maybe a little bit higher and more of it at a different angle, like over there. Cool, let's render that. And I think I'll be done. I'm going to up my noise samples to 600 to give a more clear look. And there it is, beautiful, crisp and clean with some nice bokeh in the background. Looks very photorealistic. This is a cool background. You can, of course, animate this, render this as a video file, because remember, these cubes are moving. So if you just press play and stop and render again, you'll get a totally new arrangement of cubes, because these are all procedurally animated with very little effort, in my opinion. The more you do this kind of stuff, the quicker you get at it. Play with different shapes. Use hexagons, use cylinders. Add some different colored lighting on both sides, make them transparent. There's lots of fun stuff you can do if you experiment a little bit. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, ask down below. Hope you'll be back again soon. Bye.